Where were you born?
I was born at St. Joseph's Hospital in Chatham, Ontario,
And where did you grow up?
in Raleigh Township on the 9th concession, about 8 miles from Chatham and 3 miles from North Buxton.
And what was the area like?
The area?
Yeah, what comes to mind when you think of the area?
It's just farming community, rural, gravel roads, no hydro at our place. It was about a mile away from us. We had gas, but we were always blessed with that anyway.
And
we had telephone. Ours was the last one. The Dillons and the Waddicks beyond us didn't have telephone. If somebody wanted to get a message that we had to go and relay the message.
and what was your farm like?
Just 75 acres. It was small. But then my father didn't have a tractor until just shortly before he died. So he worked with horses, so it was always had milked about 3 cows and had raised young calves, and when they grew up he butchered. Always had our own meat. Always had pigs too, and chickens.
Describe your dad in a few words.
My dad. He was Irish, very talkative, and people enjoyed talking to him because he had a humorous way of stating things. But if he didn't like you, you definitely knew it, for sure. He told he didn't care for my uncle Bill's wife, and she was kind of talking one time about, the people didn't recognize her or something, and she thought she was pretty good. And he said, I'd know your old hide if I saw it in a tannery.
And describe your mother in a few words.
Mother was a worker. She was quiet. I think she had to be, maybe, but she was a quiet person. Sewing. I never could figure out how she could sew at lamplight. I can't. I have to have lots of light. She was always busy. My dad and I, or the kids, we'd go visiting over at the neighbors, but she always stayed home because she was working, doing something. She didn't go very often.
What do you remember most about them?
What do I remember the most about them? I don't know what I can say I remember the most. They were two different personalities, but it worked. I'm sure it was a happy marriage.
What was most important to them?
Well, church was very important. We didn't miss church. My dad was a nervous driver, and it was real snowy or something, and we managed to go with one of the neighbors or somebody else. Church was very important.
Did your mom like to cook and bake?
Oh yes, she liked to bake. And my dad liked pies, so we had a lot of pies. She was a very good pie maker. Once in a while cake, but not very often. And he did like cookies too. He called them biscuits. Because when he and Uncle Bert lived together, they ate a lot of biscuits. Which I guess cookies were sort of called biscuits at that time, maybe.
What was your favorite meal as a child?
I liked meat. We had a lot of meat, of course. I don't know. I can think of like a favorite. I like most vegetables, not cooked cabbage. I like cabbage salad. Mother always had a garden, so we always had fresh vegetables. And our basement wasn't heated in the winter time, so potatoes and things were kept down there with a blanket over them so they didn't freeze. So we ate healthy.
What were your memories of Christmas when you were growing up?
Well, I guess our biggest worry was whether we'd even have a Christmas tree, because my dad wasn't really into Christmas. Because his father died when he was 7 or 8 years old, and he was the oldest of 4 kids, so they certainly couldn't afford anything. I don't know how Grandma ever made it, but I think if he got an orange for Christmas, that was really something. But in the end, we always managed to have a Christmas tree that was freshly cut, probably from somebody's property around the neighborhood. And we decorated it.
What kind of decorations did you have?
Well, we had some of the bought little globes, like as you would see nowadays. No electricity, so we didn't have the electric lights, and some of the homemade type of things. I don't know if we ever strung popcorn together. We might have. I can't say that I really remember. Yeah, Mom decorated for Christmas. Oh, the house had to be clean. I should get into a frenzy, I think, cleaning the house before Christmas. I don't know why.
Did you have people over?
She'd always ask Uncle George, whose wife had died. He lived in Detroit, but he never did come to our place for Christmas. I know that. So we were generally alone. And we got together with Uncle Bert and Aunt Margaret, and then Aunt Margaret's sister and her husband, more like at New Year's or in the 6th of January, but not usually on the Christmas day.
How were birthdays celebrated?
Well, they really weren't. I was 16 before I had a birthday party. There wasn't much fuss made about birthdays, really.
When you think about your sister, Aunt Pewee, how do you describe her?
Well, I guess Mick and I thought she was a nuisance. Well, she was 3 years. She was younger. We were totally different dispositions. So she did tend to be a nuisance.
Did you play together when you were growing up?
Yeah, but we did. We played out in the yard underneath a poplar tree, and we had some boards and whatever. Pretend we had playhouses and we'd make cooking it with mud and make some water with it and mess around. Pretend. Lots of pretend. Dolls. Yeah.
So how did you fill your summers when you were young growing up?
Well, there was always the thrashing would be when it was at our place. Aunt Margaret would come and help. That was always kind of a fun day, a thrashing day. I would go over to Grace Wadding's as often as I could because she didn't have any girls, and I didn't mind drying dishes at her place, but I didn't enjoy doing it at home, of course. I really enjoyed Grace. She was a real talkative lady, and I would spend as much time over there as I was allowed.
And Mickey was one of your good friends?
And he was.
What did you and Mickey do together?
I don't know, we smoked behind the barn too, we did. Well, like I told you, that chassis of an old car was there, and that's how I learned my gear shift was on that thing. Mick taught me that. I don't know. What else would he had a bicycle, and I did learn to ride a boy's bike. And in the wintertime, if there was a little bit of ice under a bridge that wasn't too far away, had wear an old pair of his skates, which would be way too big for me. So I was never much of a skater. But okay.
So did you have other friends growing up?
Well, Mary Lou Doyle was in my class, and I was a few months older than her. So we visited back and forth like once in the summertime. They'd come to, she and her sister was 3 years younger, Burnett, or a couple of years, I don't know, whatever. They would come down, and I'd go to their place about once a summer. But it wasn't like nowadays where parents drive their kids everywhere and take them. And I probably saw one movie in all those years when I was visiting with my Gerber cousins. It was just, times were different.
So did you spend a lot of time with your aunts and uncles and cousins?
Basically because my dad didn't like driving, when we ever did go to grandma's or places that were a distance, Uncle Bert would drive and Aunt Margaret, and we went with them. He would drive as far as Ridgetown, because the Goldhawks lived about a mile out of Ridgetown, and Annie Goldhawk was Mom's first cousin. They were almost the same age. And Dad liked talking to Jimmy Goldhawk. He was talking to fellow. So we'd go there usually once a year anyway. That was the part of the state he would drive. Uncle Bert liked to drive. We went a distance, we would have a car going down the street.
So who was your favorite aunt, uncle, or cousin?
Well, Uncle Bert was a favorite uncle. He liked kids. He was totally different than my dad, personality. He could have been a politician. And he'd have a chocolate bar in his pocket, Jersey milk. And Uncle Joe Piper, because we would visit there usually at Easter holidays for a few days, Mom and Pee Wee and I. And Uncle Joe was always having some little gadget or wooden thing that he had made, and you had to figure out, well, you never did figure out how he did it, how he made it. So he was a favorite too.
How was love expressed in your family?
Well, there wasn't any, like I told you, I guess, when my father almost died with blood poisoning when I was probably 6 or 7 or something, because I vaguely remember it. We went to the hospital to visit, and my mother kissed my dad. Well, I'd never seen her kiss him before. So it wasn't a lovey-dovey type of a marriage that way.
So as you got older, as you were a teenager, what did you enjoy doing?
What did I like doing? Oh, I always liked reading magazines, and it was Eileen Dillon from next door had sent over one summer magazines, and I think I spent a whole summer downstairs in the basement where it was cooler reading magazines. Always liked magazines. I like to read. I always liked to read. That's what I wanted for Christmas when I was a kid. What do you want for Christmas? A bookie. So I don't think I was very old when I wanted a bookie. Always liked to read.
What did you do together when you were visiting relatives? Did you listen to music? Did you play cards?
Relatives.
Or friends or family or neighbors?
Neighbors. The card playing was at our place, more or less, with two lamps, one in each corner. On the table, 2 lamps. When you went over to Grace's, they didn't play cards. that was really the meeting place, was that old house. And Grace loved to talk to them. And Rudd, her husband Rudd, worked in a tobacco factory in the wintertime, and he'd be sitting there falling asleep, and she said, "Go to bed, Rudd, rather. I'll talk to the man." And she did. She liked to talk to them. At our place, we liked to play cards, but they didn't play cards over there. That's how I got to play young, because I needed a third person. So Jim would come over. When Harold came, we didn't play cards. He wasn't so interested in playing cards.
What did you do when you were in boarding school for fun?
What did I do for fun? Well, I don't think we did a heck of a lot. We had a lot of homework. The nuns were good at handing out homework. Besides doing homework, not a heck of a lot. Although there were dances, I just lived on the next street from St. Blessed Sacrament Church, and they would have dances there in the wintertime. So when I usually have a little bit of money for maybe babysitting or something, and go over to the dance. And at one point, a girlfriend of mine lived on the same street. She was boarding too, and we'd go together. And her brother was a lot older than her, but she was the youngest in the family. He would always ask you to dance at least once. And there'd be usually some soldiers there from the camp at Chatham. So get to dance once in a while.
So did you mention smoking with Nikki? Did you break any other rules?
Not too many. I don't think so.
What was your favorite music when you were growing up?
Well, I always liked Bing Crosby. Wasn't a big Frank Sinatra fan, like most of the girls were at that point. I can't think what you call it now. Those men that sing together.
Barbershop or quartet?
Yeah, I like that. There was a program on the radio in the evening. If I turned on, my mother did not like that music. I don't know why, and she was much more musical than I was. Because she could play the organ. I had music lessons for a little while, but there was no hope for me.
So tell me about your education. Where did you go to grade school?
Oh, the school was about 1.25 miles from our place on Doyle's property, so it was called, many years, it was not even known that it had any other name than Doyle School, but they found some records. It was St. Anthony's School. That's what it was. And what else did you want to know about that?
And then where'd you go after grade school?
Well, grade 9 I went to the high school because my father wasn't very impressed with the nuns and couldn't afford to send me there to boarding school. But then after he heard Dean Compost's sermon about Catholic education, he thought I should be going to the Pines. So that's when I switched in grade 10. And that's how I started to board with the Thompsons, because he had talking to Mr. Thompson when he was buying some parts for machinery and said, "Do you know anybody in North Chatham that would take my daughter?" And then they had phoned because their daughter Margaret was going away to university in Winnipeg. So that's how I started to live with the Thompsons, and Ruth and I shared a room. And we talked in bed every night before we went to sleep. She's the same age as my sister, but Ruth always seemed older or something than her age. I don't know. But we did get along famously.
So you went to high school at the Pines, and then what did you do when you graduated?
was that the summer I think that was the summer that I took the summer course because they were so short of teachers. And then my first teaching was just at a rural school for about a month, because the teacher had her appendix out. And then I think we were talking about, I started at Doyle School, or St. Anthony's was its proper name, because the teacher decided she was an older lady and she needed dental work. So I started there in September would have been October. That's about where we left off, I think. And I taught I think there were 4 kids, and I had been in class with 4 kids that I was teaching. Sonny and Jimmy Waddick were 2 of the kids. They called me Miss Lark at school, but once school was over, I was Marion. It's kind of interesting. But I don't know. I never had any trouble with the discipline, maybe because I was tall, bigger, or I don't know what, but I never did have a problem with keeping order or anything like that.
Did you take any other schooling after high school?
Oh yeah, that year at the vocational school, or part of a year anyway, that my dad made me take. And I eventually got my grade 13, which you had to have in those days to go to normal school. I eventually got that. And then I went back to normal school for the whole school year.
And what was normal school?
That was in London, which nowadays it would be called Teachers College.
And did you take nursing eventually?
Where did I go? I went in between, somewhere in between there I went in nursing, but it was not for me. I tried to quit at Christmas, and Sister talked me into, they knew my mother from London, just talked me into staying, and I stayed until March, and I think it was March when I quit.
And then did you start teaching after that?
Well, I didn't have my permanent certificate, but they were short of teachers, so I did get some positions. Just, I don't know if that's when I taught in Fort Erie. I can't remember for sure how it all went.
So is that how you chose your career? Was it by choice or was it by happenstance?
It was more by happenstance, really, it was. Because I never thought I wanted to be a teacher when I was growing up.
And where did you teach after? Where were all the places that you taught?
Well, I taught at the home school at St. Anthony's School. My very first week was at a St. Teresa's School. That was for 3 weeks. And then it was St. Anthony's School. I taught in Fort Erie. Left at Christmas time, basic, because I knew I had to get my grade 13. And the other teacher wasn't happy. She'd been teaching about 8 years. Wasn't very happy with the whole situation there, and we didn't have the greatest boarding house. And she was quitting, so then I quit at Christmas and went back to the Pines, working on my grade 13.
And then once you had your grade 13, what did you do?
Well, then I eventually went to normal school for the whole year, then, or teacher's college, whatever you want to call it, and boarded at the same place in London where I had boarded when I took that summer course. And when I lived there, or took that summer course, the very first class for the science teacher, he looked at my name and he called me Larky, Miss Larky. So it's kind of a joke. And then at the boarding house, everybody laughing about it at the table, and then everybody started calling me Larky. And then when I went back to go the whole year, I was boarding at the same house, which is right across from the school. And of course they still called me Larky, so that's how I got the name. And all the kids, all my friends were called me Larky.
So after teachers college or after normal school, did you teach, or is that when you did your nursing?
Well, it was just after that summer course that I did the nursing. It was before I got my teacher's degree, for sure. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And why did you not stay in nursing?
I figured I'd kill somebody. I probably could have been a nurse's aide and just done that, carried bedpans and carried dinner trays out. In those days, you had to clean the room, too. You were the cleaning lady, too. I could have done that stuff, but I didn't think I'd ever be able to give a hypo. I'd probably kill somebody. And they kept sticking me on the maternity ward, which was so different than it is nowadays.
So when you did go back to teaching, did you enjoy it?
Oh, yeah. I don't know if I wanted to be a teacher my whole life. I don't know. But, yeah, I did. I think it's what I meant to be.
What did you like most about it?
But I never taught after I was married. There was no opening for substitute teacher and I didn't have my license to drive anyway. If there had been, that was when I went after I got married. So I never taught again.
What did you like most about teaching?
Good question. I don't know. I guess to see the kids learn, progress. There was one poor fella that had an awful time in grade 1. And he died maybe last year. There was a nice write-up about him in the paper. He was a farmer, he was married, but for some reason, after 2 years in grade 1, he still wasn't able to read very much. I don't know why, if it was me or him. I don't know. But I never had any trouble with discipline, never. When I taught the last school I taught at, the one near Amherstburg, the teacher before me had taken the kids down to the river to swim. It was a pretty lackadaisical. She wasn't much of a teacher, apparently. So when the first day of school rang the bell, the kids to come in, they were coming in like a herd of cattle, just. So, okay. Everybody outside will ring the bell again. And maybe they were a little better, so I don't know how many times we did that until they came in properly. If you say you're going to do something, do it. Don't say I'm going to whatever and never do it. You have to do it. And then they know there's no problem after that. I know my sister couldn't keep order at school. Her first school, I don't think it was. Her kids wouldn't want to be told probably, but she was fired because she couldn't keep order. But I never had a problem.
So you mentioned when you came to Woodsley, you couldn't drive. When did you learn how to drive?
Well, I could drive a little bit. I could drive a little bit, but I didn't have my license. And now I know. I tried my license here in Essex, and I know now from the stories from people who knew this guy. he lived here some place in town. At his house, you'd go there, and he'd get in the car with you, and you just went right around the block, and you got your license. And Betty Vermeulen even drove up on the sidewalk when she got her license. And they all laugh about it, that guy. That it didn't matter what you did, you got your license.
So how old were you when you got your license?
I was 23 when I got married, and I don't think I got it till the next spring, I think. Because originally we had the old car, Grandpa's old car, and it was probably still in his name or something. Anyway, I don't know exactly why I waited that long, but.
So you said you got married when you were 23. When did you meet Dad?
Oh, well, I was 22 when I met your dad. I had vaguely known who he was before that, but that's another story. My father died on the 29th of December and was buried on New Year's Eve. And I assume that might have been something Mrs. French did. I don't know. I was boarding with the Frenches at Amherstburg and teaching near Amherstburg. That I stayed home an extra week with my mother then. Didn't go back. And I went over to say goodbye to Grace, I guess. Grace Waddick. And Bob was visiting there. Grace and Laura had always liked Bob, and they'd always figured out Bob was supposed to marry me. But anyway, Bob was there. And I'm sure it was Grace's idea. I don't think it was Bob's. Well, you might as well drive Marion back to Amherstburg, like as if Woodsley and Amherstburg were next door to each other. So it would have been a Sunday afternoon, and when we got to their place, the CYO, or whatever they called it in those days, the youth group anyway at the church, they were having a hayride that night. And Pat, well, she was very outgoing and friendly, and she had just graduated, I think, from grade 12 or something, showing me all her stuff. And she said, well, you might as well stay and go on the sleigh ride, or the horse. Well, they had horses hooked up onto something. So then Bob didn't drive me home until the morning to Amherstburg. And then he asked if he could come the next Sunday night. So I said, okay. Sunday night came, the Frenches weren't home, praise the Lord. And he didn't come. Finally, I think about 8 o'clock or whatever, he phoned. He had been godparents for Eugene Fuerth for Mac and couldn't get away. So it's a good thing Mr. French wasn't home, or I'd have sure been getting teased. And then he came the following Sunday. So
you mentioned you had met Dad before. What do you remember from your childhood meeting him?
Well, I think Grandma's two brothers, Rudolph, they were just across the road from us, and the home place was about a half a mile down the road. And she would, the Michigan Central Railroad went through Woodstock, came through north of Buxton. She would come with the kids on the train, and her brother Harold would meet her, and she'd spend maybe the Easter holidays or something, whatever. So with him coming in down to play with Mickey, I knew who he was. And at one time it was the three boys, Butch and Bob and Sam, and I don't think they were very thrilled with playing a girl because they didn't have, well, Pat maybe was a baby by that time. And we're playing on a swing, and they had a swing over at Waddick's place, at Grace's place, and playing on the swing, and Sam was swinging, and he got off, and then he threw up because they can't stand that. So that just about finished me right there. But so I just kind of knew who he was from, and then when his cousin Mickey got married, Mick and Marion, and there was a community shower for them at the schoolhouse, and Bob was at it. And I know I was talking to Laura Waddick, who was Bob's aunt, and he came along and was talking, And it was her idea that he dance with. So they had it figured out years ago.
So how long did you date for, and what were dates like?
How long did we date for? We were dating either 37 or 38 days, and we were engaged. So I don't know for sure which it was. Just knew right from the beginning, I guess.
And what did you do on dates?
Not a heck of a lot, because there was a theater in Amherstburg. So I can remember the first time when I think he put his arm across it. I hope there's nobody in here that knows me, the teacher at the school, you know. And we went bowling because I had done a little bit of bowling in Fort Erie, and Bob had been bowling. So I guess that's mostly what. There wasn't much to do in Amherstburg. Not really.
What do you remember about the proposal?
I wasn't too sure it was a proposal. Well, he wasn't good with words, you know that. I guess I said yes and didn't know for sure whether it was a proposal or not, to tell you the truth. It was after St. Patrick's dance, 17th of March.
And then you were married later that year?
Yeah, in August. He wanted to get married in July because that was a little space there where the farmers weren't so busy, and there was no way I can be ready for a wedding in July. And as it was, the plans weren't really made till school was over. And besides that, with my father having died, Mom had been living with Aunt Lizzie, and Uncle Joe had been taking her shopping around for a house. And the one time I was with him, we saw this house, which wasn't too far from uptown in Chatham and that, but it wasn't clean. She wouldn't have anything to do with it. It would have been a much better location than where she actually bought. But, and then by the time school was out, she was living just in a small apartment near St. Joseph's Church. So I guess I lived there for a little bit with her, and the people that knew that this wedding was going to happen, they actually moved out of the house before they really had to let her get the house. So there wasn't a lot of planning done before the wedding. I broke out in hives. I think that's what happens to me when I am stressed, that I get stupid spots that are like it's not a hive, but itchy, you know. So it wasn't a fancy wedding, but all the aunts and the uncles.
Did Grandma make your dress?
No, bought it in Detroit. It wasn't a wedding dress, actually. It was just a prom dress. Boy. Pee-wee's, I think hers was yellow, maybe. Maybe, I forget. I think it was yellow.
What do you remember about the day of the wedding?
Well, the biggest thing was probably the day before, I always read the Star, and I guess I always read obituaries. There was a funeral at the church at the same hour as our wedding. But anyway, here it is, this wedding this funeral at 10 o'clock the day of my wedding. So we called the priest hospital, and they had to change it. And the people were not happy. But so we get up to the church, and the funeral's leaving the church by the time we get up there.
Did you go on a honeymoon?
Oh, yeah. I figured probably with marrying a dairy farmer, that'd be the last chance I'd have. So we went as far as Montreal. But we landed in Montreal kind of at rush hour, which was not a good time. Your father wasn't the greatest driver because he never drove a whole lot. Butch or his dad did. Well, anyway, I don't know. We found some place we stayed overnight in Montreal, and I think we went on one little tour or something to someplace. And then from then on, we went up through Quebec, and then crossed the river into, where are we? Ottawa? Yeah. Didn't do too much in Ottawa, but we were gone about a week, I think.
And then did you move to Woodsley after that?
Yeah, we come back. They thought they'd been working on this whole house, the house, that we would sleep at Grandpa's for a while. So there was no way where I was going to sleep there. And we get there, and there's a wash tub, an old wash tub in the center of the floor, which was eventually the living room, but it was the kitchen then, with junk in it, because they sort of swept up and put it in this thing. The bedroom, Jean had helped me wallpaper the room upstairs, the bedroom. Well, one partition had been taken out because there were 4 small rooms up there. Took the one out. And that had been papered, so the bedroom was ready, and the furniture in there. But that's about it.
So was it an adjustment to being married and living in Woodsley?
Not really. I don't think.
When you think about Dad, how would you describe him?
He was all heart. He loved to work. He helped people. He was good with old people. I guess he always had been. That's why his Aunt Laura and his Aunt Grace liked him, I think. He just had a lot of personality. People liked Bob.
What did you enjoy doing most with Dad?
I don't know. We used to go on picnics. We never had a whole lot of money or anything. That was, and then take the kids on picnics. Like, you could go to Point Pelee then and have a table. The tables were there and stuff. We always enjoyed that sort of thing. We hardly ever went to the movies. Neither one of us were great movie fans. We didn't have a television for a long time. Well, you know that. And when we did get television, I could watch anything I wanted at night, because your dad would just sit there and fall asleep immediately. Yeah.
What were some of the events that shaped your life?
Events. Well, perhaps living with the Thompsons. I don't think I would have ever been a teacher, maybe, if it hadn't been for Mrs. Thompson. I don't know.
What were some of the best decisions you ever made?
Well, probably to finally get my education and get my certificate and to marry your dad.
What are you most proud of?
7 kids? Who knows? I don't know. There's things you would change if you had to do it all over again, of course.
Anything come to mind?
Not particularly.
Any highlights or anything that stands out?
Highlights. About what?
About life in general.
Life in general. Well, I always liked to sew, and I always liked to read, and those are two things I miss now that my eyesight's so poor. Although I can read, but not through a book or a newspaper.
What are some lessons you've learned in life?
Well, if you say you're going to do something, do it. Or if you tell kids they can't do something, they can't do it. Whatever you say, make sure you know what you're saying, I guess.
What do you think the world needs more of right now?
Prayer, love.
Is there any words of wisdom or any messages you would share with your family?
Well, it's just such a different world than it was when I raised my kids. And I don't know how. There's just so much on television and all the little gadgets that they have. It's totally different, totally. I'd probably be a real crabby mother now. I don't know. I probably was.
And lastly, what are you most thankful for?
The which?
What are you most thankful for?
Well, when I think back, I'm thankful for my parents that sometimes probably didn't agree with them naturally, like kids never do. That I was raised Roman Catholic. And I've always been thankful for my education and the fact that I lived with so many different people in so many different places, experiences that when I'm visiting with people, a lot of people that are my age, they've never lived anywhere else or done anything else, and they're just kind of stuck in a rut. I don't know. I think it makes it easier in your old age to have had these experiences. I just see, I do see a different take. Well, I do see different between city and country people too, quite a bit. Or people that had parents perhaps that didn't speak English came to this country. They seem to have different ways. I don't know.
That's all the questions I had. Did you have anything else you wanted to add? Any other memories or?
Thanks. No, I'm always thankful just that I have known and have lived with so many people and known so many people, I guess. That even though I'm often the quietest one in the group, but I enjoy being with other people.